The rain was pouring hard on the night she was born. In a small hospital on the edge of town, a young couple held their newborn daughter for the first time. She was beautiful, with tiny fingers that curled around her father's thumb and a face so peaceful it made her mother cry tears of joy. But something was wrong. The doctors noticed it first. The baby's eyes didn't respond to light the way they should. After several tests, the news came like a thunderstorm. Their daughter was blind, completely blind. She would never see her mother's face, never watch a sunrise, never read a book with her own eyes. Her parents were devastated. They weren't rich people. Her father worked at a factory, fixing machines that broke down almost every week. Her mother cleaned houses in the wealthy part of town. They had barely saved enough money for the hospital bills, and now they were facing a future they hadn't prepared for. How would their daughter navigate a world built for people who could see? The first few years were hard, really hard. While other children in the neighborhood learned to ride bicycles and play catch, their daughter stayed close to home. She learned to move around their small house by memory, counting steps from the kitchen to her bedroom, using her hands to feel the walls and furniture. Her parents child-proofed everything, covering sharp corners and keeping the floor clear of obstacles. But there was something special about this little girl. Something her parents started noticing when she was around 3 years old. She would stop whatever she was doing whenever music played. It didn't matter if it was the radio, a street musician outside, or even her mother humming while cooking. She would tilt her head and listen with such focus, such intensity, that it seemed like she was seeing something the rest of them couldn't. One evening, her mother was watching a cooking show on their old television. A classical music piece played in the background. Their daughter, who had been playing with her toys on the floor, suddenly went completely still. Then she started humming, not just random sounds, but the exact melody that was playing, note for note. Perfect pitch. Her father looked up from his newspaper. Her mother turned off the stove. They both stared at their 5-year-old daughter, who was recreating a complex musical piece she'd only heard once just seconds ago. That's when they realized something incredible. Their daughter might not be able to see the world, but she could hear it in ways they never could. Music wasn't just sound to her. It was color. It was light. It was everything. The problem was they couldn't afford music lessons. They could barely afford groceries. Her father was working double shifts at the factory, and her mother was cleaning more houses than ever, but money was always tight. They lived in a small apartment where the walls were thin, and the heating barely worked in winter. A piano, music lessons, those were luxuries for other families, but her mother refused to give up. She started asking around town, talking to anyone who might help. Most people were sympathetic but couldn't offer much. Then one day she heard about old Mrs. Chen, a retired piano teacher who was moving to a nursing home. She was selling everything, including her piano. Her mother went to visit Mrs. Chen. The piano was old, scratched, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them, but it worked, and more importantly, it was cheap. Mrs. Chen, hearing about the blind girl who loved music, offered an even better price. She said something that stuck with the mother forever. Music doesn't need eyes. It needs heart. They borrowed a truck from a neighbor and somehow managed to move that heavy piano into their tiny apartment. It took up almost a quarter of their living room. Her father complained that there was barely space to walk anymore, but he was smiling when he said it. The day the piano arrived was the day everything changed. Their daughter was 7 years old. Her mother guided her to the piano bench and placed her small hands on the keys. The girl pressed one key, then another, then another. She was mesmerized by the sounds, by the way each key had its own voice. For the next few weeks, she spent every free moment at that piano. She would wake up early before her parents and play. She would rush home from school and play. She would stay up late, her fingers exploring the keys in the dark, though darkness was all she'd ever known anyway. She had no teacher, no sheet music, no formal training whatsoever. She learned by listening to the radio, to recordings her mother borrowed from the library, to whatever music she could find. She would listen to a piece once, maybe twice, and then recreate it on her piano. Sometimes she got it wrong at first, but she would work at it hour after hour, until her fingers found the right pattern. Her parents were amazed, but they worried too. They worried about her spending so much time alone with the piano. They worried that she wasn't making friends at school. They worried that she was using music to hide from a world that was often cruel to people who were different. Kids at school weren't always kind. They called her names. They said she was weird. Some of them would wave their hands in front of her face, laughing when she didn't react. She pretended not to care, but her mother could tell it hurt. Music became her escape, her safe place, her way of expressing everything she couldn't say with words. By the time she turned 12, something remarkable had happened. She wasn't just copying music anymore. She was creating it. She was taking classical pieces and adding her own style, her own emotions, her own story. She was composing original melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. Word started spreading around their small town. The local church asked if she would play during Sunday service. She agreed, and when she played that first Sunday, grown adults cried. They said her music touched something in them they didn't even know existed. It wasn't just technically good. It was emotionally overwhelming. Soon she was playing at the church every week. People started coming from neighboring towns just to hear her. They would sit in those old wooden pews, close their eyes, and let her music wash over them. Some said it was healing. Others said it was like hearing the voice of something greater than themselves. Her parents were proud, but they were also realistic. Their daughter was talented, incredibly talented, but what kind of future could she have? They lived in a small town where opportunities were limited. Professional musicians came from big cities, from wealthy families who could afford the best teachers and the best schools. Their daughter was a blind girl from a poor family who had taught herself to play on a broken piano. Still, they dreamed. Every parent dreams for their child, and in their quiet moments when they watched their daughter play with such passion and skill, they wondered if maybe, just maybe, the world might one day recognize what they already knew, that their daughter wasn't disabled. She was gifted. She was special. She was extraordinary. What they didn't know was that someone had recorded one of her church performances on their phone. That person had posted it online with a simple caption, "Blind girl playing piano in our small-town church." The video had gotten a few hundred views, then a few thousand, then tens of thousands, and in a city 3 hours away, an email arrived at a prestigious music academy. It was an invitation to their annual showcase, where amateur musicians could perform in front of professional judges. Somehow someone had nominated her. The email sat in her mother's inbox unopened, waiting to change everything. Her mother found the email 3 days after it arrived. She was checking her inbox for a message from her employer when she saw it. The subject line read, "Invitation to perform at Metropolitan Music Academy Showcase." At first she thought it was spam. People like them didn't get invitations to places with names like that, but she opened it anyway. As she read, her hand started shaking. It was real. A genuine invitation for her daughter to perform at one of the most prestigious music academies in the state. The showcase was open to amateur musicians, and someone had submitted her daughter's church performance video as a nomination. It had been accepted. She didn't tell her daughter right away. That night, after putting her to bed, she showed the email to her husband. He read it twice, then looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it hope? Fear? Maybe both. "We can't afford this," he said quietly. "Look at the date. It's 3 weeks away. In the city, we'd need to take time off work, pay for gas, maybe even stay overnight." "And for what?" "So she can play in front of a bunch of rich people who probably already think we don't belong there." Her mother understood his concern. They were barely making ends meet as it was. But she also saw something else in his eyes. He wanted this for their daughter just as much as she did. He was just scared. Scared of disappointment. Scared of seeing their daughter face rejection in a world that already gave her so many obstacles. "What if this is her chance?" her mother whispered. "What if we don't go and we spend the rest of our lives wondering what could have been?" They talked until midnight. By the end, they had made a decision. They would go. They would figure out the money somehow. They would give their daughter this opportunity, even if it scared them to death. The next morning, they told her about the invitation. She was eating breakfast, her fingers tracing the edge of her plate the way she always did to know where everything was positioned. When her mother finished explaining, she stopped mid-bite. "A music academy?" she asked. "Like a real one? With actual musicians?" "Yes, sweetheart," her father said. "They want you to perform at their showcase. There will be judges there. Professional musicians. It's a big deal." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly they almost didn't hear it, she said, "I'm scared." Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "I know, baby. We're scared too. But you're so talented. The world needs to hear what you can do. Over the next 3 weeks, she practiced more than ever. She chose her piece carefully, a classical composition she had been working on for months, adding her own interpretations and emotional layers. She played it so many times that her father joked he could hear it in his sleep. But even he had to admit each time she played it, it got better, deeper, more powerful. The night before the showcase, none of them could sleep. Her mother had borrowed a decent dress from a neighbor. Her father had cleaned their old car until it looked almost presentable. They had scraped together just enough money for gas and a cheap hotel room, though they all knew they'd probably end up sleeping in the car to save those funds. The morning of the showcase, they left before sunrise. The drive to the city took 3 hours, and with every mile, the nervousness grew heavier in the car. Their daughter sat in the back seat, her fingers moving silently through the air, practicing the piece over and over in her mind. When they finally reached the city, everything felt overwhelming. The buildings were taller than anything in their town. The streets were packed with cars and people rushing everywhere. Her father got lost twice trying to find the academy, and by the time they pulled up to the building, they were already running late. The Metropolitan Music Academy looked like something from a movie. It was all marble columns and huge glass windows. People in expensive clothes were walking in and out, carrying instrument cases that probably cost more than their car. Her mother helped her daughter out of the back seat, and for a moment they all just stood there staring up at the building. "Maybe we should go home," her father said. "We don't belong here." But her daughter straightened her shoulders. "We drove 3 hours," she said. "I'm going in." Inside was even more intimidating. The lobby had crystal chandeliers and polished floors that echoed with every footstep. There were photos on the walls of famous musicians who had studied there. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going and what they were doing. Her family felt like aliens who had landed on the wrong planet. A woman with a clipboard approached them. She looked them up and down, taking in their thrift store clothes and nervous expressions. "Can I help you?" she asked in a tone that suggested she'd rather be doing anything else. "We're here for the showcase," her mother said. "My daughter is performing." The woman checked her clipboard. "Name?" After confirming the registration, she handed them visitor badges and pointed down a long hallway. "The auditorium is that way. Performers check in backstage. The showcase starts in 30 minutes. As they walked down the hallway, they passed other young musicians warming up. A boy with a violin that gleamed under the lights. A girl doing vocal exercises, her voice so perfect it sounded like a recording. Everyone looked confident, trained, professional. Everyone looked like they belonged. Her daughter heard them too. She heard the perfect scales, the flawless technique, the years of expensive training in every note. She squeezed her mother's hand tighter. Backstage was chaos. Performers were everywhere, tuning instruments, reviewing sheet music, being fussed over by teachers and parents. A man with a headset was calling out names and giving instructions. The energy was intense, competitive, almost aggressive. They found a quiet corner and waited. Her mother could feel her daughter trembling slightly. "You okay, sweetheart?" "There are so many people," she whispered. "Really good people? What if I mess up? What if I embarrass us?" Her father knelt down beside her. "Listen to me. You're not here to be better than them. You're here to be you. That's all anyone can ask. You play from your heart. That's your gift. Nobody here can do what you do." Before she could respond, they heard it. A voice from the auditorium, loud enough to carry backstage. It was a man's voice, refined with a slight accent. "I appreciate the Academy's commitment to inclusion, but really, must we lower our standards? I saw the program. There's a blind girl performing today. No formal training, no credentials. This is a serious musical institution, not a charity event." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Other performers backstage had stopped what they were doing. Some looked uncomfortable. Others smirked. Everyone was suddenly very aware of the blind girl standing in the corner with her working-class parents. Her mother's face went red with anger. Her father clenched his fists. But before either of them could say anything, the man with the headset called out, "Next performer, please take your position. 5 minutes to curtain." They learned later that the man who had spoken was Victor Petrov, a world-renowned pianist visiting from Europe. He was the guest judge, the one everyone wanted to impress. And he had just dismissed their daughter before even hearing her play. Her mother started to say they should leave. This was a mistake. They didn't need this kind of humiliation. But when she looked at her daughter, she saw something unexpected. The trembling had stopped. Her daughter's face had changed. The fear was still there, but something else had joined it. Determination. Anger, even. "Which one is he?" her daughter asked quietly. "Which one is who, honey?" "The man who said that." "The judge. Where is he sitting?" Her father glanced through the curtain. "Front row. Center seat. Why?" She didn't answer. She just walked toward the stage entrance, her white cane tapping against the floor. Her parents followed, confused, worried, but also a little bit proud. Their daughter had heard herself being dismissed, being called a charity case, and instead of backing down, she was walking straight into the fire. The auditorium was massive. Hundreds of seats, almost all of them filled. The stage was enormous, with a concert grand piano at the center, spotlights making it shine like something holy. Her mother guided her daughter to the piano bench, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The announcer's voice echoed through the space. "Our next performer is 15 years old from Millbrook. She will be performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with her own interpretation." There was a murmur in the audience. Rachmaninoff? That piece was notoriously difficult. Even trained pianists struggled with it. What was this blind girl thinking? In the front row, Viktor Petrov leaned over to the academy director and spoke, not bothering to lower his voice much. "This should be interesting. In the way, watching someone fail is always somewhat fascinating." Her daughter heard him. Everyone backstage confirmed it later. She heard him sitting there at that piano bench, her hands resting on the keys, and something inside her shifted. She took a deep breath. Her parents stood in the wings, holding each other, praying. The entire auditorium waited. And then she began to play. The first note hung in the air like a question. Soft, delicate, almost uncertain. Some people in the audience shifted in their seats, already preparing to be disappointed. Viktor Petrov glanced at his watch, as if calculating how long he'd have to endure this before the next performer. But then came the second note. And the third. And suddenly something was happening that nobody expected. Her fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that seemed to come from nowhere. She wasn't just playing Rachmaninoff. She was having a conversation with it, arguing with it, making it bend to her will. The piece that everyone knew, the piece that had been performed thousands of times by thousands of pianists, suddenly sounded completely new. In the wings, her mother grabbed her father's arm so tight it hurt. They had heard their daughter play countless times, in their tiny apartment, at the church, during practice sessions that lasted until midnight. But this was different. This was something else entirely. The technical difficulty of the piece was insane. Rachmaninoff had massive hands, and he wrote music that required stretches most pianists struggled with. But she navigated it like she'd been born to play it. Her small hands flew across the keys, finding notes that seemed impossible to reach, creating cascades of sound that filled every corner of that massive auditorium. But it wasn't the technical skill that was getting to people. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be taught in any music school or found in any textbook. She was playing with her whole body, her whole soul. When the piece called for sadness, you could see it in the way her shoulders curved inward, protecting something fragile. When it demanded power, her entire frame seemed to grow, commanding the instrument to obey. She swayed with the music, her face showing every emotion the notes were creating. People in the audience started reacting. A woman in the third row brought her hand to her mouth. A man in the balcony leaned forward, gripping the railing. The other performers backstage had stopped their warm-ups and were watching through gaps in the curtains, their mouths open. Viktor Petrov's expression changed. The smugness faded. His arms, which had been crossed defensively, slowly unfolded. He sat up straighter, his eyes fixed on the blind girl at the piano. And for the first time since entering that auditorium, he was completely focused. She reached the middle section of the piece, where the melody becomes almost unbearably beautiful. This was the part that made people cry even in mediocre performances. But what she did with it was something beyond beautiful. It was honest. It was raw. Every note carried the weight of her entire life. The isolation, the mockery, the struggle, but also the joy, the determination, the refusing to give up. She was telling her story through Rachmaninoff's notes. She was showing everyone in that room what it felt like to live in darkness but create light, what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, called a charity case, and what it felt like to prove every single one of them wrong. Tears started flowing, not from one or two people, but from dozens. The Academy director, a man who had spent 40 years in music and thought he'd heard everything, felt his eyes burning. He took off his glasses and wiped them, pretending it was just dust. A girl backstage, a violinist who had been smirking earlier, started crying so hard her teacher had to comfort her. "I don't understand," she kept whispering. "How is she doing this? I've trained for 10 years. How is she doing this?" Her father, standing in the wings, wasn't even trying to hide his tears anymore. He was watching his daughter, this incredible human being that he and his wife had brought into the world, and realizing that she was so much more than he'd ever imagined. She wasn't just talented, she was touched by something greater. The piece built toward its climax. This was the part that separated the good pianists from the great ones, the part where you either nailed it or fell apart trying. She attacked it with a ferocity that made some people jump. The piano rang out, the notes crashing together and controlled, chaos building and building until it felt like the entire auditorium might explode from the intensity. Viktor Petrov had tears streaming down his face now. He didn't bother wiping them away. He just sat there, this man who had performed for kings and queens, who had played in the greatest concert halls on earth, who thought he knew everything there was to know about music, and he wept like a child. Because he was witnessing something he'd only read about in stories, something he thought might be a myth. He was witnessing pure, unfiltered genius. Not genius that came from years of expensive training or perfect technique. Genius that came from somewhere else, somewhere he couldn't explain. She brought the piece to its conclusion with a tenderness that broke whatever was left of people's composure. The final notes were so soft, so gentle, like a lullaby or a prayer. Her hands moved in slow motion, finding the last chords with perfect precision, and then she played the final note. It hung in the air for what felt like forever. She kept her hands on the keys, her head slightly bowed, her chest rising and falling from the effort and emotion of what she'd just done. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. For 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Her mother panicked. Were they disappointed? Was the silence bad? Had something gone wrong? Then Viktor Petrov stood up. Just him at first. He rose from his seat, and he started clapping. Slow, deliberate claps that echoed through the silent auditorium. Then the person next to him stood. Then the row behind them. Then the entire front section. Within seconds, the whole auditorium was on its feet, and the applause was deafening. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the kind of clapping you do because you're supposed to. It was thunderous, emotional, the kind of applause that makes the walls shake. People were cheering, shouting, crying, hugging strangers next to them. The other performers backstage were clapping too, some of them reluctantly, others with genuine appreciation. The standing ovation went on and on. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. She sat at the piano, confused, overwhelmed. She could hear the applause, but she couldn't see all the people standing, couldn't see the tears, couldn't see how completely she had destroyed every preconception in that room. Her mother rushed onto the stage and wrapped her arms around her daughter, both of them crying now. Viktor Petrov didn't wait for the applause to end. He walked straight toward the stage, moving past the Academy director, past the other judges, climbing the stairs with a purpose. The applause started to fade as people noticed him approaching. By the time he reached her, the auditorium had gone quiet again. He stood there for a moment, looking at this 15-year-old blind girl who had just taught him a lesson he never expected to learn. Then he did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He got down on one knee, bringing himself to her level. "Forgive me," he said, his voice cracking. The microphone picked it up, broadcasting his words to everyone. "I said terrible things. I called you a charity case. I doubted you before hearing a single note. And what you just did, what you just made me feel." He couldn't finish the sentence. He just shook his head, more tears falling. "In 40 years of music, I have never heard anything like that. Never. You don't just play the piano. You speak a language the rest of us have forgotten. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." She didn't know what to say. This famous pianist, this man who had mocked her minutes ago, was kneeling in front of her, crying, apologizing. The whole thing felt like a dream. The academy director joined them on stage. "Young lady," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I would like to offer you a full scholarship to our academy. Room, board, tuition, everything. We would be honored to have you study here." Before anyone could respond, Viktor Petrov spoke again. "And I would like to mentor you personally, if you'll have me. If you can forgive an old fool who thought he knew everything." The auditorium erupted again. People were crying, clapping, laughing. It was chaos in the best possible way. Her parents stood together in the wings, holding each other, unable to believe what was happening. But the most incredible part hadn't even happened yet. Because outside that auditorium, someone had been live streaming the performance on their phone. And at that exact moment, the video was starting to spread across the internet like wildfire. They drove home that night in stunned silence. The scholarship offer, Viktor Petrov's apology, the standing ovation, it all felt like something that had happened to someone else. Her daughter sat in the back seat, exhausted, her hand still trembling slightly from the performance. Every few minutes, one of her parents would start to say something, then stop, unable to find the right words. When they finally pulled into their driveway at 2 a.m, her father's phone rang, then her mother's phone, then the house phone that they barely used anymore. They looked at each other, confused. Who would be calling at this hour? Her mother answered. It was her sister, calling from 2 states away, practically screaming into the phone. "Turn on your computer, check the internet, you need to see this right now." They didn't own a fancy computer, just an old laptop that took forever to start up. Her father opened it while her mother tried to calm down her sister, who kept saying something about videos and millions of views and going viral. None of it made sense. Then the laptop screen finally loaded and they understood. The video of her performance was everywhere. Not just on one website, but on dozens. Someone had recorded the entire thing and posted it online, and it had exploded across social media in a matter of hours. The numbers were climbing even as they watched. 50,000 views, 100,000, 200,000. The comments were coming in so fast they couldn't read them all. People from different countries, speaking different languages, all saying basically the same thing. They had never heard anything like it. She had made them cry. She had changed something in them. Her father refreshed the page. 500,000 views, and it had only been posted 6 hours ago. "Oh my God," her mother whispered. "Baby, do you understand what's happening? The whole world is watching you play." But she was already asleep on the couch, completely drained from the day. They decided to let her rest. Tomorrow would be soon enough to explain that her life had just changed forever. By morning, the view count had passed 2 million. The house phone was ringing nonstop. Her mother's email inbox had over 300 messages. News outlets were requesting interviews. Music blogs were writing articles. Classical music forums were debating the technical aspects of her interpretation. Even people who had never listened to classical music in their lives were sharing the video, saying they couldn't stop watching it. The local news station showed up at their door around noon. Then a reporter from the city. By evening, there was a van from a national network parked outside their small apartment. Neighbors were coming by, some to congratulate them, others just curious about all the commotion. Her daughter handled it better than her parents did. She gave interviews, answering questions with a maturity that seemed beyond her years. Yes, she was surprised by the response. No, she didn't think she was better than other pianists, just different. Yes, she would love to continue studying music. No, being blind wasn't something she thought about much anymore. It was just part of who she was. The video kept spreading. 5 million views, 10 million, 20 million. It was showing up on morning talk shows, being discussed by famous musicians, analyzed by music professors. A celebrity with 50 million followers had shared it, writing simply, "This made me believe in beauty again." Viktor Petrov called their house directly 3 days after the performance. He wanted to start working with her immediately. He had canceled the rest of his international tour, something he had never done in his entire career. He said he had spent the last 40 years perfecting his technique, but she had reminded him that technique without soul was just noise. He needed to learn from her as much as she could learn from him, the academy also called. They wanted her to start as soon as possible. They would provide everything she needed: a specially designed room with equipment for blind students, a personal aide to help her navigate the campus, anything that would make her comfortable. The director said her presence would inspire every student there. They needed her as much as she might need them, but the most surprising call came from a record label, a major one. They wanted to produce an album. A full album of her playing, her interpretations, her original compositions. They said they hadn't been this excited about signing a classical artist in 20 years. The advance they offered was more money than her parents made in 5 years combined. Her father had to sit down when he heard the number. Her mother cried. They had spent 15 years scraping by, working multiple jobs, never able to afford the things other families took for granted. And now, because their daughter's gift had finally been seen by the right people, everything was changing. But with the attention came challenges they hadn't anticipated. Not everyone online was supportive. Some people accused the whole thing of being staged. Others said she was only getting attention because of her disability, not her talent. A few cruel comments suggested she was being exploited by her parents for money and fame. Those comments hurt more than her parents wanted to admit. They had spent years protecting their daughter, trying to give her as normal a life as possible. They had never pushed her to perform, never treated her like a product. Music was her joy, her choice. But now strangers were questioning their motives, their character, their love for their child. She saw some of the negative comments. Someone read them to her before her parents could stop them. That night, she didn't play piano. She just sat in her room, quiet, processing everything. Her mother found her there around midnight. "You okay, sweetheart?" "I don't know," she admitted. "A week ago, I was just a girl who played piano at church. Now millions of people have opinions about me. Some of them hate me, and they don't even know me. I don't know how to handle that." Her mother sat beside her. "You know what I think? I think when you do something extraordinary, some people will love you for it, and some will resent you for it. That's not about you. That's about them. The question is, are you going to let the negative voices stop you from sharing your gift?" She thought about that for a long time. Then she said something that surprised her mother. "Viktor Petrov judged me before hearing me play. He was wrong, but at least he admitted it. He apologized. These people online, they hide behind screens and say terrible things, and they never have to face the people they hurt. I think that says more about the world than it does about me." Her mother hugged her tight. "When did you get so wise?" "I've had a lot of practice seeing past surfaces," she said with a small smile. "Comes with the territory." The next day, Viktor Petrov arrived at their town. He had rented a small studio space and brought his own piano, a beautiful instrument worth more than their entire apartment building. He said if she wasn't ready to move to the city yet, he would come to her. They could start lessons here in her hometown where she felt safe. Their first lesson was supposed to be about technique, about theory, about the formal training she had missed. But Viktor spent most of it just talking. He told her about his own journey, how he had started playing at age 4, pushed by demanding parents who saw him as a ticket to a better life. How he had won every competition, earned every accolade, played at every prestigious venue, but somewhere along the way he had lost the joy of it. "You play like someone who loves music," he told her. "I play like someone who conquered it. That's the difference. That's what I heard in your performance, and that's what I need to remember." He asked her to play something, anything. She chose a simple piece, one of the first ones she had ever learned on that old broken piano her mother had bought years ago. It was nothing fancy, nothing impressive, but the way she played it with such pure affection for every note made him understand what he had been missing. They worked together for hours. He showed her techniques that could make difficult passages easier. She showed him how to feel the music instead of just playing it. It was an odd partnership, the world-famous maestro and the blind teenager from a small town. But somehow it worked. Word spread that Viktor Petrov was teaching in their town. Other musicians started showing up, curious, wanting to witness this unlikely collaboration. The studio became a gathering place for people who loved music, who wanted to see what happened when technical mastery met raw emotional honesty. Meanwhile, the video continued its journey across the world. It had been translated into dozens of languages. Musicians in Asia were analyzing her technique. Orchestras in Europe were reaching out about potential collaborations. A documentary filmmaker wanted to follow her journey. A best-selling author wanted to write her biography. But the message that meant the most to her came from an email buried among hundreds of others. It was from a mother in Australia, writing about her 8-year-old son who had been born blind. He had been depressed, refusing to leave his room, convinced that his blindness meant his life would always be limited. Then he heard her performance. He asked his mother if he could learn piano. He said if the girl in the video could do it, maybe he could too. Her mother read her that email, and for the first time since the performance, she cried. Not from stress or overwhelm, but from understanding something profound. Her music wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger than that. Every note she played, every performance she gave was telling people that limitations were often just lies we tell ourselves. 3 weeks after the showcase, the video reached 100 million views. Record labels were fighting over distribution rights. Concert halls were offering booking fees that seemed absurd. Everyone wanted a piece of the blind girl who had made the world stop and listen. But she was still the same person, sitting at the same broken piano in the same small apartment, playing for the same reason she always had. Because when her fingers touched those keys, nothing else mattered. Not the blindness, not the fame, not the opinions. Just the music and the story it told. 2 years passed faster than anyone expected. She moved to the city to study at the academy, but she came home every chance she got. Her parents had tried to refuse the money from her first record deal, saying she should save it for her future. She had insisted on buying them a new house, nothing fancy, just something where the heating worked properly and her father didn't have to fix everything himself. The album they made together sold beyond anyone's predictions. It topped classical music charts in 17 countries. Critics called it a masterpiece. But what struck people most was listening to her original compositions, pieces she had written herself, melodies that seemed to come from a place no conservatory could teach. She named the album Through the Darkness, and every penny of profit beyond what her family needed, she donated to organizations that provided music education for disabled children. When reporters asked her about it, she said something simple. Someone gave me a chance when they didn't have to. Now it's my turn. Carnegie Hall in New York City had been calling for months. They wanted her to perform there, in one of the most famous concert venues in the world. She had been nervous about saying yes. Carnegie Hall was where legends performed. People like Leonard Bernstein, Ella Fitzgerald, and Tchaikovsky himself had played on that stage. Who was she to walk in their footsteps? But Viktor Petrov, who had become more like a grandfather than just a teacher, told her something that changed her mind. Those legends you're so worried about? They were just people who had something to say through music, just like you. The only difference is they said yes when opportunity knocked. Now it's knocking on your door. What are you going to do? So she said yes. The concert was scheduled for a Saturday evening in October. Tickets sold out in less than 4 hours. Some people paid thousands of dollars for seats in the balcony. The venue added extra seating on the stage itself, behind where she would play, just to accommodate the demand. Her parents flew to New York with her. Her father had never been on a plane before. He gripped the armrests during takeoff, and her mother had to remind him to breathe. But when they landed and saw the city, saw the massive posters outside Carnegie Hall with their daughter's face on them, he cried right there in the taxi. The night before the performance, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that day at the Academy showcase when Viktor Petrov had called her a charity case. She thought about all the times kids at school had made fun of her. All the moments when she felt like being blind meant she would always be less than everyone else. But she also thought about the emails. Thousands of them now, from parents of disabled children, from people who had given up on their dreams and decided to try again. From musicians who said her playing had reminded them why they fell in love with music. From complete strangers who said watching her perform had been one of the most beautiful moments of their lives. The day of the concert arrived. Carnegie Hall was more magnificent than she had imagined. The staff treated her like royalty, making sure everything was perfect. They had arranged for her to touch the piano hours before the performance, to get familiar with it, to feel comfortable. Viktor Petrov was there early. He sat in the empty auditorium watching her practice, and she could hear him crying quietly in the audience. When she finished her warm-up, he came backstage and hugged her tightly. "No matter what happens tonight," he said, "I want you to know something. You changed my life. I was a bitter old man who thought he knew everything about music. You taught me I knew nothing about what really mattered. Thank you for that gift." As evening approached, the auditorium filled. 2,800 seats, every single one occupied. People from all walks of life. Celebrities, musicians, regular working people who had saved up for months to afford a ticket. The youngest person there was 6 years old, a blind boy whose parents had written to her months ago. The oldest was 92, a woman who had attended her first Carnegie Hall concert in 1952. Backstage, her mother helped her get ready. The dress she wore was elegant but simple, nothing too flashy. Her mother fixed her hair, adjusting it nervously until she finally stopped and just looked at her daughter. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Not because you're famous or because you play beautifully. I'm proud because you never let the world tell you what you couldn't do. You just kept being yourself." Her father joined them. He had been pacing in the hallway, more nervous than she was. "You've got this, sweetheart. Just play like you always do. Play from here." He took her hand and placed it over his heart. The announcement came. 5 minutes until curtain. The audience settled into their seats. The lights dimmed. Somewhere in the balcony, a phone camera was already recording, ready to capture whatever happened next. She walked onto that stage, guided by a stagehand, and the applause that greeted her was warm and welcoming. She found the piano bench, sat down, and placed her hands on the keys. The auditorium went silent. All 2,800 people held their breath. She had chosen her program carefully. Some classical pieces that showcased her technical ability, some of her own compositions that revealed her soul, and at the end, the piece that had started everything, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same one she had played at the Academy Showcase. From the first note, it was clear this wasn't just another performance. This was something transcendent. She poured everything into those keys, 2 years of growth, of learning, of understanding herself better. Every lesson from Victor, every email from inspired strangers, every doubt she had overcome, every moment of joy she had found in music. The audience was mesmerized. People forgot to check their phones. They forgot about their problems, their stress, their daily worries. For those 2 hours, they existed only in the world she was creating through sound. When she played her original composition, a piece she had written about her journey, titled "Seeing Through Sound," there wasn't a dry eye in the house. A music critic who had attended over 500 concerts would later write, "I have heard technical perfection many times. I have rarely heard such honest, vulnerable, powerful, emotional truth." And then came the Rachmaninoff, the piece that had changed her life. But she played it differently now. Not with the anger and determination of someone trying to prove herself, with the wisdom of someone who had learned that she had nothing to prove. She played it like a conversation with an old friend, full of nuance and understanding and grace. Viktor Petrov sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face, just like they had 2 years ago. But these were different tears. These were tears of joy, of witnessing someone he cared about achieving something extraordinary. The final note rang out, held by the pedal, fading slowly into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the entire auditorium exploded. People leaped to their feet. The applause was deafening, mixed with cheers and shouts of bravo. The standing ovation lasted 12 minutes. 12 full minutes of continuous applause. She stood and bowed, overwhelmed, grateful, humbled. They called her back for 3 encores. The third time, she played the simple piece she had learned on that old broken piano in her tiny apartment all those years ago. It was her way of saying thank you to everyone who had helped her get here. After the concert, the line of people wanting to meet her stretched through the entire backstage area. She stayed for hours, shaking hands, accepting hugs, listening to stories. The 6-year-old blind boy and his parents waited patiently at the end of the line. When they finally reached her, the boy was shy, hiding behind his mother. She knelt down to his level. "Hi there," she said gently. "I heard you're learning piano." He nodded, then whispered something his mother had to repeat. He wants to know if being blind makes it harder. She thought about her answer carefully. "Being blind makes some things harder," she said honestly. "But it also gives you something special. You learn to hear the world in ways other people can't. You learn that sight is just one way to experience beauty. And you learn that the biggest obstacles aren't the ones the world puts in front of you. They're the ones you put in front of yourself." The boy smiled. Before they left, he said one more thing. "When I grow up, I want to play just like you." She touched his shoulder gently. "Don't play like me. Play like you. That's what makes music special. Everyone has their own voice. Find yours." The interviews that followed the Carnegie Hall performance went on for weeks. Major magazines wanted features. Television shows wanted appearances. A movie studio wanted to make a film about her life. It was overwhelming and exciting and exhausting all at once. But through it all, she remained remarkably grounded. When an interviewer asked her what success meant to her, she said something that would be quoted thousands of times. "Success isn't about being famous or making money or playing at Carnegie Hall. Success is about using whatever gifts you have to make the world a little better than you found it. I'm just a girl who plays piano. But if my music helps someone believe in themselves, if it helps someone keep going when they want to give up, then I've succeeded beyond my wildest dreams." 5 years after that showcase at the Academy, she established a foundation. It provided free music education and instruments to children with disabilities. Viktor Petrov donated $1 million to help launch it. Within 3 years, the foundation had helped over 10,000 children discover their own voices through music. She continued to perform, to compose, to inspire. But she never forgot where she came from. That small apartment with the broken piano, those Sunday church services where it all began, those moments of doubt when she wondered if being blind meant she would never fit in. In interviews late in her career, reporters always asked about that day at the Academy, about Viktor Petrov's cruel words and how she overcame them. She had a standard answer that never changed. "He taught me something important that day. He taught me that other people's limitations on you are just their limitations."